I don't remember a time when my sister wasn't the favorite. Some people say parents don't mean to choose one child over another, that it just happens. But in our house, it wasn't subtle. It was routine. It was woven into the walls, the conversations, the way my name was spoken only when something needed fixing. My sister was younger by 3 years, but she carried herself like royalty. From the day she was born, the air shifted. My parents smiled more, laughed louder, took more pictures. My baby photos stopped appearing in albums once she arrived, replaced by endless pages of her sleeping, her crawling, her first steps, each one celebrated like a miracle. When she cried, my mother rushed in, voice soft, hands gentle. When I cried, my father sighed and told me to toughen up. "You're the older one," he'd say, as if age was armor, as if being born first meant I needed less love. At dinner, my sister sat beside my parents. I sat wherever there was space. Her stories were met with attention and questions. Mine were cut off mid-sentence. If she interrupted me, nobody noticed. If I interrupted her, I was rude. "She's just sensitive," my mother would say whenever my sister misbehaved. "He knows better." My father said whenever I did anything wrong. That sentence followed me through my entire childhood. Birthdays made the difference impossible to ignore. My sister's parties were loud and colorful, balloons, friends, music, gifts stacked high like trophies. Mine were quiet, a cake, a handshake from my father, a reminder to clean up afterward. One year, my sister blew out my candles because she wanted to. Everyone laughed. I didn't when money was tight. Sacrifices were made, but never hers. I dropped out of a school trip because it was too expensive. The same month, my sister started piano lessons. When I asked why, my mother looked at me like I'd asked something inappropriate. "She has talent," she said. I learned early that fairness wasn't part of the family language. By middle school, I stopped asking for help. I did my homework alone, cooked when no one else wanted to, took care of chores without being told, always hoping, that someone would notice. But praise was reserved for my sister, even when she didn't try. When she failed a test, my parents blamed the teacher. When I brought home perfect grades, my father said, "That's what we expect." No smile, no hug, just expectation. The worst part wasn't the favoritism. It was how normal everyone acted about it. Like this was the natural order. Like I was wrong for feeling hurt. I remember one night in particular. I must have been 13. My sister had broken a lamp during one of her tantrums. When my parents got home, she cried instantly and pointed at me. "He distracted me," she said. I tried to explain. My voice shook. I'd been in my room the whole time, but my father didn't listen. He grounded me for a month. Took my phone, told me I needed to stop causing problems. That night, lying in bed in the dark, something inside me changed. I realized then that the truth didn't matter, only who said it. From that day on, I became quiet, not weak quiet. I watched, I listened, I learned. I learned that love could be earned but never counted on, that safety came from self-reliance. That if I wanted something, I'd have to build it myself without applause. My sister grew into her role effortlessly. Confident, entitled, she expected doors to open because they always had. My parents fed that belief, calling her special, destined, our star, and me. I was invisible unless something went wrong. By the time I turned 18, I didn't dream of escaping anymore. I planned it. I didn't hate my family. Hate requires energy, and I'd already learned to conserve mine. What I felt was quieter, heavier, a promise. I promised myself that one day I'd live a life so full that their neglect wouldn't hurt anymore. That their favoritism wouldn't define me, that I'd stop begging for a place at a table that was never meant for me. And while my sister was being prepared to be loved, I was being prepared to survive. Leaving home didn't feel like freedom. It felt like being erased. The day I packed my bags, nobody asked where I was going. My mother stood in the kitchen, stirring a pot she wasn't watching. My father skimmed the newspaper like the world hadn't just shifted. My sister leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, smiling like she'd won something. "Don't struggle too much." My mother said without turning around, it wasn't concern, it was expectation. I stepped outside with everything I owned in 2 suitcases and realized something terrifying. No one was coming to save me. And strangely, that truth felt lighter than all the years of hoping they would. The first apartment was small, cold, and too quiet. The walls were thin. The mattress sat directly on the floor. At night, I stared at the ceiling and wondered if this was what independence was supposed to feel like, empty and heavy at the same time. I worked wherever I could, coffee shops, warehouses, late, night shifts that paid just enough to keep the lights on. I ate cheap food and learned to stretch every dollar. There were days I skipped meals and nights I fell asleep fully dressed because the heat was off. Through it all, my family barely checked in. When my sister called, it wasn't to ask how I was doing. She wanted favors, help with homework, editing resumes, listening to her complain about how hard her life was. She never asked where I lived, never offered help. She assumed I was fine because I always had been. My parents called even less. On birthdays, my mother sent a text hours late. My father forgot twice. When I mentioned struggling at work once, he laughed lightly and said, "That's life, builds character." Funny how character building only applied to me. I learned to keep my victories private. When I got a promotion, I celebrated alone with cheap takeout. When I paid off my first debt, I smiled quietly and went to bed early. There was no one to clap, and eventually I stopped expecting applause. What I did have was focus. While others partied, I read. While coworkers relaxed after shifts, I stayed late and learned everything I could. I watched how people made money, not just earned it, but multiplied it. I paid attention to patterns, to opportunities hidden inside problems. I failed a lot. I invested small amounts and lost them. Tried side projects that went nowhere. Trusted the wrong people. Each failure stung, but none of them broke me. Pain was familiar territory. Rejection was old news. The difference now was choice. For the first time, every step forward belonged to me. Years passed. Slowly, almost invisibly, my life changed. I moved into a better place, bought furniture that didn't wobble. Paid bills without panic. My bank account grew not fast but steady. I reinvested. Took calculated risks. Learned patience. Still, my family believed I was barely surviving. At holidays, I showed up in simple clothes. Listened more than I spoke. My sister dominated conversations, complaining about jobs she quit, relationships she ruined, dreams she expected others to fund. My parents nodded sympathetically, blaming bad luck, bad bosses, bad timing. Nobody asked about me. Once, my aunt mentioned she'd heard I was doing well. My mother laughed it off. "He's managing," she said. "But you know him, nothing ambitious." I didn't correct her. There's a strange power in being underestimated. People stop watching, they stop competing, they show you who they really are. And my sister, she became everything my parents encouraged: confident, entitled, convinced success was something that arrived if you waited long enough. She borrowed money, asked for help, took shortcuts, and when things fell apart, she blamed the world. I stopped offering advice, stopped rescuing her. I learned the difference between love and enabling. One night, sitting alone in my apartment, I looked around at the life I'd built with no help, no safety net, no favoritism, and I felt something I'd never felt before. Pride, not the loud kind, the quiet kind, the kind that doesn't need witnesses. I realized then that my parents' neglect hadn't destroyed me. It had trained me. While my sister learned how to be supported, I learned how to stand. While she waited to be chosen, I chose myself. They still didn't see me, but I no longer needed them to. Because somewhere along the way, silent survival had turned into strength, and strength was about to change everything. I never planned to tell them. Not because I was ashamed, but because some doors are better left unopened. My life was peaceful in a way it had never been before. Quiet, controlled, honest. Letting my family back and felt like inviting chaos into a house I'd finally finished building. But secrets have a way of surfacing when you least expect them. It happened at a family gathering I almost didn't attend. A birthday for an uncle I barely knew. I told myself I'd stay an hour, smile politely, then disappear again. That had become my routine. Show up just enough to avoid questions, leave before expectations formed. I was standing near the back porch when my aunt started talking loudly about investments. She mentioned a company name, my company. Casually, proudly, like it was public knowledge. "Oh, that one's doing incredibly well," she said. "Did you know he owns most of it?" The air shifted. My mother froze mid-laugh. My father slowly lowered his glass. My sister turned so fast her chair scraped the floor. Every conversation around us faded into silence. I felt it then, the weight of a truth that no longer belonged only to me. My father cleared his throat. "What does she mean owns most of it?" I could have lied, shrugged it off. But for once I was tired of shrinking. I founded it. I said calmly. My sister laughed, sharp and disbelieving. "You, since when?" I met her eyes. "Since years ago." Questions came fast after that, numbers, timelines, disbelief tangled with suspicion. Finally, my father asked the one question that mattered. "So how much are we talking about?" I paused. Not for drama, but to steady myself. "About 15 million. I said, "Net." The room went completely still. My mother's face changed first. Shock softened into something else. Pride, maybe, or relief. Tears filled her eyes as if she'd always known this moment would come. My father stared at me like he was recalculating a memory he'd misjudged. And my sister? She looked at me like I'd stolen something that belonged to her. The transformation was instant. My mother rushed forward and hugged me, tight and emotional. "Why didn't you tell us?" she cried. "We would have helped you, we're so proud." Helped me, the word echoed painfully. My father clapped my shoulder and apologized vaguely, carefully. "I guess we were too hard on you," he said, as if years of neglect were a minor miscalculation. My sister didn't say much that night. She didn't need to. Her silence was busy doing math. The calls started the next day. My parents wanted dinners. Long conversations. Suddenly, they were interested in my work, my health, my plans. They told friends about me. Bragged, claimed me. It was disorienting. Watching people love you differently once they know your worth in dollars. My sister's approach was more direct. She invited me out for coffee. Just the two of us. The first time in years she'd asked for my company without needing something, or so it seemed. She talked about reconnecting, about how we'd drifted apart, about how hard life had been for her. Her voice softened when she mentioned money, how unstable things were, how unfair it was that some people had to struggle while others didn't. I listened, then she asked, not outright at first. She hinted, a business idea, a temporary loan, an investment that would change everything. She framed it as partnership, as family loyalty. "You've always been smart," she said, smiling, "and I deserve a chance too." There it was. Not need, entitlement. When I didn't answer immediately, her tone shifted, subtle at first, then sharper. "Our parents sacrificed everything for us," she said. "Don't you think you owe them, owe me, that word again?" Oh, I realized then that nothing had changed. The favoritism hadn't disappeared. It had just switched targets. Now, instead of being ignored, I was being claimed. That night, I sat alone and replayed my childhood like a film. The birthdays, the blame, the silence, I thought about every time I'd been told to be patient, to understand, to give more. And I knew this wasn't reconciliation. It was opportunity for them, and for the first time in my life, I understood that the truth wasn't cruel. It was freeing. Revenge doesn't always arrive with raised voices or slammed doors. Sometimes it comes quietly, dressed as clarity. I didn't confront them right away. I needed time not to plan punishment, but to understand what I actually wanted. For the first time in my life, I had leverage. Money gave me something I'd never had before, choice. And with choice came responsibility. So I chose truth. I invited my parents and my sister to dinner at my place. Not a restaurant, my home. I wanted them to see it. The life I'd built without them, the clean lines. The calm, the absence of chaos. They arrived dressed carefully, eyes wandering, taking inventory. My mother smiled too much. My father asked too many questions. My sister studied everything like she was measuring where she fit. We ate, talked lightly, avoided the real conversation until dessert. Then I spoke. "I know why you're here," I said, my voice steady. "And before anyone asks for anything, I need to say something." They went quiet. I didn't accuse. I didn't raise my voice. I told stories, small ones, the kind that add up. I reminded them of the school trip I never took, the birthday candles blown out by someone else, the month-long grounding for a lamp I didn't break. I talked about leaving home with 2 suitcases and no goodbye, about years of silence that taught me how to survive alone. My mother cried softly. My father stared at the table. My sister crossed her arms. "I'm not angry," I said. "I already paid the price, but I won't pay it again." That's when my sister snapped. "So what, you're punishing us now," she said. "You think you're better than us because you got lucky. Lucky." I smiled, not kindly, but calmly. "I wasn't lucky," I said. "I was neglected, and I learned how to live without help. There's a difference." She demanded to know what that meant, what I was going to do, whether I'd help or not. I stood and walked to my desk, opened a folder, set it on the table. Inside were documents. I'd already made my decision. I explained that my money was protected, invested, structured, and untouchable by family pressure. No loans, no bailouts, no shared accounts. I told my parents I loved them, but love didn't mean access. Then I turned to my sister. "I won't fund your life," I said gently, "but I will fund accountability." I offered something she didn't expect: coaching resources, education support, therapy coverage. Help that required effort, growth, responsibility. She laughed bitterly. "So you get to judge me now?" "No," I replied. "I get to choose myself." That was the moment everything broke open. My parents finally spoke real apologies, not the soft ones they'd used before. They admitted they'd relied on me being strong, so they didn't have to be fair, that they'd given my sister comfort and given me pressure. It didn't erase the past, but it acknowledged it. My sister refused to accept my terms, stormed out, said I'd changed, that money had made me cruel. But the truth was simpler. Money hadn't changed me. It had revealed them. Weeks passed, then months. The calls slowed. My parents adjusted, learning boundaries they'd never respected before. Our relationship became quieter, but more honest. My sister tried to paint herself as the victim, complained to relatives, told anyone who'd listen that I'd abandoned her, but something unexpected happened. People started asking questions. And for once, the truth was on my side. I didn't need revenge that hurt. I needed revenge that healed. 1 year later, I stood in my living room, looking out at a city that no longer felt like an escape, but a home. I felt no guilt, no anger, just peace, because the greatest victory wasn't proving them wrong. It was proving myself right. I was never the less loved child. I was the one who learned how to love myself first.